All right, so we're recording now. And okay. So here's what we're gonna do. Do you guys all have your version open?
I have, yes.
Okay.
I have it.
Okay. So guys, as I've been saying, we're gonna be starting To Kill a Mockingbird. This is considered one of the great American novels, which means Landon needs to get off his phone and pay attention. But this is considered one of the great American novels ever written, one of the greatest, okay? The author really only wrote one book. It is based a lot on her childhood and the place she grew up and the things she experienced. They recently, a couple of years ago, published another book that's supposedly a sequel to this. It was actually the original draft of it. And it was more, she was an adult. The character's name is Scout. And the original draft, Scout was an adult, went back to visit her father, and then is talking about these stories. And the stories she talked about, the publisher said, focus on this part. This is what we want. This is the best part of the novel, is the part where you're talking as the child. Okay? And so that's what she did. So they were calling the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird is actually the original draft. Okay? But because the perspectives are different, they can call it a sequel. But those are the only things that she has ever published. And like I said, it was based on her childhood. One of the characters that we have in it is a boy named Dill. And Dill, Scout is based on the author. Dill is actually based on the author's childhood friend, Truman Capote, also a well-known author, American author. He wrote a lot of nonfiction. In fact, he wrote one about a crime, a murder that was committed somewhere in the Midwest back in the 50s. But Truman Capote was a very different character, but he was also an author, and he was a childhood friend of the author of To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, so it is based, and her father was an attorney in the South. And, you know, she didn't use their names, but the events that she's talking about, and I'm not sure her father ever was the defended in this kind of a trial that we're going to see, but she based it on some things that actually had happened at that era. Okay, so it is a great novel. Now, I will say I appreciated it more as an adult than I might have as a teenager, but it's well written. There are parts in it that are easy for you to follow and enjoy, things that happen. It's about growing up. It's about how we see people. It's about social justice. It's about all of these elements. Okay. All right. So everybody have yours open? Okay. This, I did put in here, the information in this presentation was excerpted from the Prestwick House Incorporated Individual Learning Packet for To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay. So here's the first thing we need to understand. In the South, there was a social structure in the 1900s. Okay. You had three classes: the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class. The upper class were former plantation owners. Okay. It was the 1900s, so they no longer owned slaves, but their families still own these great big plantations. What? Okay. So the upper class was plantation owners, professionals like doctors and lawyers and that kind of thing. They were the professionals, all right? But big landowners. The middle class was made up of small farm and small business owners, okay? And notice its owners, the owners of small farms and small businesses. That was the middle class. The lower class were African American farmers and unskilled laborers. And often this included any kind of, and we'll talk about that, tenant farming, which was both African American and white farmers who didn't own their own land. And they basically rented the land and worked it for the owner. Okay. Guys, did you get what you needed off of this page?
I can't even find it.
Okay. Did you get it to work for him, Landon? It's still processing? Okay. Sarah, if you need to, you might just write the answers you need on a piece of paper. Because you don't have to write all of this down, you're just filling in parts. Okay. All right, so then moving on to the next slide. So Southern heritage in the upper class. This is what we want to talk about first. So we're going to look at the upper class. The upper class consisted of people whose families had lived in the same area for generations. Guys, how many of you, your family has lived here for at least 3 generations in Knox? Jaden's, Rebecca's, anybody else? You think yours have? Landon, you think yours has? I know, let me see, back in my hometown, I know that both my dad and my mom's family lived in their hometowns for 2 generations, but not, what? That's okay, but at least, you know, somebody, I don't think in my family that, now I have cousins who they are the 3rd or 4th generation of our family to live there, but I think, let's see, grandma and grandpa, then my mom and her siblings, my cousins, and then their children. Yeah. I think I was only I guess I was a 3rd generation. My parents, my mom's parents, and then my mom, and then me, although I don't live there, so I guess I don't count anymore. None of my siblings live in my hometown.
Yeah.
What?
I don't know. It's fine.
Okay. Okay.
I don't even know.
So here's what happened. These were the upper class. These were the people. Now, guys, you also need to understand, it doesn't mean they had money because they were considered the upper class. We're in the Depression. But so the upper class were these people whose families had lived in the same area for generations. They either owned the huge plantations or they were educated as white-collar professionals, okay? You know, we've always kind of tended to divide the working force into white-collar and blue-collar. Do you know the difference? White-collar are typically the jobs that you had to go to college for, okay? Like being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a teacher. Well, at one point you didn't have to go to college to be a teacher. You just had to pass the exams. But later it became a requirement. If you were a nurse, okay, that's a white collar profession. The blue collar professions were usually the skilled trades. Like if you were in construction or welding, things like that, that you, yeah, a lot of those required training, some kind of apprenticeship or something like that. Factory workers, all of that. All right. So there was this class divide based on what you did or how long your family had lived there. It says the amount of money they had was not as important as the appearance of comfort. This included having African American servants. Okay. It was a status symbol. No one had money, so the Southerners used their ancestry as a way to separate the elite from the common folk. All right. Now, guys, please understand, I'm not telling you this because we think any of this was correct. We're just telling you this is how it was. Okay. There are things that happen in To Kill a Mockingbird that are way beyond wrong. But it's important that we understand that these things happened and understand the wrongness of them. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So, poverty and unemployment. Oh, guys, again, this is during the Depression, the Great Depression in the 30s. Over 13 million Americans had lost their jobs during the Great Depression. In a 3-year period, farm prices fell by over 50%. The average American income in 1929 was $750. That was for the entire year. That was the average American income. The annual farm income was $275. Now, one of the things that helped the farmers was that a lot of them were able to grow their own food. There were things they couldn't afford to buy, though. They may have plenty of food, but they couldn't necessarily buy their kids new shoes. Things like that. Now, it's hard for us to imagine an annual income of $750 even. But things that cost dollars cost pennies. I remember even in 1962 when my parents got married, I mean, I don't remember 1962, I wasn't born, but I remember my parents telling about when they got married in 1962. Mom was a teacher. I think her annual starting salary was $6,000 or $7,000 for the year. But also they could buy groceries for $5 or $10 for the entire week. And a new car cost them maybe, well, I know it was under $1,000, like $500 or $600 for a brand new car. Maybe a little more than that, maybe 800, I don't know. But it wasn't, I mean, just in the 50 some years I've been alive, the price of things has gone up and up and up. I still remember being in college and gas was under $1 a gallon. Or maybe it raised to right over $1 a gallon. Okay, so you can buy 5 gallons of gas usually for $5.
What?
Yeah, that was when I was.
Is it gas gonna go up? It's already
I don't know.
So are you going up?
Has it gone up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Last night, like $4.
No.
Great. Okay.
What up, like 40%?
Well, it has been. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, it was up over $3 a gallon at one point. Yeah. Yep. Well, we were close to that and may have hit it a few times a few years ago. Yeah,
Close to it again.
gas prices go up and down and up and down and all over the place. But guys, my starting salary as a teacher 34 years ago was $16,000.
So you made like $4.
I don't know. I never figured out what it was an hour. But I think minimum wage when I graduated from high school was like $1.75 or something, or $2.25 or something like that.
What?
That was
You're lying.
no, I'm not.
That's
Yeah. Minimum wage when I was in high school, when I graduated from high school, was only like $2.25 or $1.75. I know, but things were actually cheaper. Okay, they were actually cheaper. They've gone up just in the past 25, 30 years. Okay, so land and farming. So the South was predominantly what we call an agrarian culture. Agrarian means a farming culture. Okay, that's what agrarian refers to. Owning or not owning land determined your social class, as we've said. Approximately 25% of the total workforce in the US in the 1930s was employed in farming. Many white people owned acres of land but had little cash. If you were African American, it was very rare that you were able to own land. Yeah, it is. It was, and there are still difficulties in parts of the country today. What?
Was it even possible for other people back then?
Yes, but it was typically in the north. Okay. With the collapse of the world trade market during the Great Depression, farmers had a difficult time selling their crops. So that's what happened with the farmers. Now, again, like I said, they could usually have they had plenty of food, but they couldn't buy the other essentials. Okay, we have all of that. All right. We also have sharecropping and tenant farmers. The majority of African American farmers worked as sharecroppers in the white people's fields. If they owned any land, it was usually a very small plot. So yeah, they did own some, but it was typically not very much. Okay. Landowners divided land into shares, provided small houses, tools, and seeds for the sharecroppers. Some also fed, clothed, and provided medical care, but I think that was more the exception than the rule. Once the crop was harvested, the landowner received a percentage of the profits after taking out expenses incurred. So even though they're providing food and clothing and so forth, they then take that expense out of their share of the profits. Okay, so they did pay for it, but it came out later. Okay, so what you need to understand is it was a tough life. If you were a farmer, if you were a sharecropper, it was pretty hard. I mean, it wasn't easy for everybody else, but especially in these circumstances. Do we have all of this? Riley's still.
Do we go to 40, 45?
What?
45.
12:45.
What time did we start?
Yeah.
11:55. So yeah, 12:40 or no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
12:45.
Yeah, 12:45.
I think.
Okay. All right, next one. So continuing sharecropping. Landowners watch the crops closely and push sharecroppers to use all the leased land for farming, leaving no land on which sharecroppers could grow their own food. So here was the difficulty for sharecroppers. They were at the mercy of the landowner saying, you have to grow this much in your field. I want you to grow these crops. So they typically didn't have the land then to grow their crops for their own tables, okay? Unlike the small farmers who could grow their own food, that own their own land. So the sharecroppers bought food from local stores, incurring debts to store owners and landowners. And sharecroppers were already deep in debt by the time the Great Depression hit. So when they could not sell their crops, they could not pay their bills. So they were already in debt to the landowners, to the shopkeepers, just because of what was going on this way. So they were in dire straits during the Depression. All right, so small farming. The small farmers grew both cash crops and their own food, making them almost self-sufficient. We say almost, okay? They still had little cash in which to buy supplies their children needed for school, like shoes, like, a warm coat, new warm coat if they needed it in the winter, new clothing. It was usually hand-me-downs and whatever they could do. Back during the Depression, there was a lot of stuff made out of flour sacks. Flour used to come in big cloth bags. And there was a lot, if you look up like clothing, typically from the 1930s, there were flour sack materials that they would use. They would use whatever they had to make a new dress or something, or a quilt, or whatever they needed. Okay? They bought farming equipment with government subsidies, but became mired in debt during the Depression. Okay, so they may not have been in debt before the Depression, but the small farmers then got into debt during the Depression. Because they would need farming equipment to farm their crops, and farm the land, but it was a big problem. All right, racism in the South. This was segregation was the most significant social issue of the South in the 1930s. I mean, unfortunately, it's still going on today. African Americans and whites were forbidden from mixing in public areas. Okay.
Really? I didn't know that.
You didn't know that? You guys
I
didn't?
was being
Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I'm not sure what you guys do know and what you don't know.
Well, I didn't know that either.
Okay. Yeah. And it wasn't, I mean, it was a little bit better in the North, but not completely. What?
I want to make chicken.
You want to make chicken? You want a McChicken or you want to make
I
chicken?
want to make chicken.
Oh, a McChicken. Okay. I have two different socks on today, guys.
One's black and one's gray, but you can't see them.
One of mine is a black Christmas Mickey sock and the other one is a navy blue Christmas Mickey sock. They're both Christmas Mickeys, but that's about it. All right, so the next slide is racism and poverty. So separate schools were provided for African American children, but without the necessary books and other supplies needed. It was supposed to be separate but equal, but it was far from it. So not only were they separated, but African American children, their schools were not given the supplies that the white children's schools were given, which was. So these children were also often needed at home to work the farms, preventing them from getting what little education was available to them. So it was very common for many of them not to be able to read and write. And it was very difficult to get ahead when you were needed at home to work. Jobs at new textile mills were given to skilled and unskilled white men. And most African Americans had to work on farms or in domestic jobs that were all low paying, keeping them below the poverty level. It was a vicious cycle, a way to.
I talked to him.
Okay. It is quieter today, though.
I know.
Because it's
I wonder why.
I wonder why.
Oh, I have to tell her.
You're starting to sound like your parents? Okay. It's what happens to all of us eventually. Okay. All right, guys, this is an important part of the story too, and what things that actually happened. Shh, listen. So this slide is racism in the justice system. So it says African Americans who questioned the biased, because it was a very biased system, were in danger of being killed, with their murderers facing no consequences.
Crazy.
It's true, though. Lynching, taking a person and hanging him, was common.
That's so
Oh, yeah.
dumb.
It happened way too often. What? Stoning, we typically don't have stonings. I mean, that was something that happened, centuries ago. Okay, but you're thinking of the story we read first semester, aren't you? Yeah, when we read the lottery in Common Lit.
My grandpa always says that they should bring that back.
Stoning?
Yeah.
Well, it's in the Bible.
He's always raising me house.
Okay. Stoning was something different. Lynching, yeah. But guys, it was a very common thing in the South. It also sometimes happened in northern states where the Klan was common. Now, we also want to talk about, this was a trial. They call it the Scottsboro Boys. This actually happened. And the trial that we see in To Kill a Mockingbird is based on the events of the Scottsboro Boys. So it was March of 1931 in Scottsboro, Alabama. There were 9 young African-American men, ages 13 to 21. They were accused of raping 2 white women on a train. Okay? Now, the only thing that they had to do with it was that they were on the train, and I think one of the boys got into an argument with one of the white boys. But they never touched the women. They had nothing to do with them. And yet, they were convicted and sentenced to die by an all-white jury. Okay? This actually happened. So here's what happened. It says, while traveling by train, 4 African Americans and 4 whites, 2 boys, 2 girls, got into a fight. Okay, I'm sorry. There was more to it than that. There was a fight. The white boys accused the others of raping the girls. All the young African American men on the train. That's what it was. There were 4 that got into a fight, or 8 kids that got into a fight. And so they rounded up all of the young African American men on the train, and they were arrested and accused. So there were 5 of them that weren't even in the fight at all, but they were all rounded up. And we'll talk more about that. There's some reading that we'll do with that to go along with this. So the characters and plot of the novel mirror the attitudes and the events of the South in the 1930s, including the trial of the Scottsboro Boys. Okay. Well, you might have heard about it. Maybe in a history class or something. I don't know. It's also been on the news, I think last summer they may have talked about it. Okay, so did everybody get all those notes?
Can you go back to the land and farming slide?
Yep. This one?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Any of the other slides you need? This one? Okay. Make sure when you're done with these that you do submit them. I am giving you points for them. Okay? Anybody else need another slide? You got them done? Okay. What? Mackenzie, did you get this one that you need? Okay.
Yeah. I'll do it.
Yeah, I need the Scottsboro Boys.
Okay, that was at the end. Sorry, I probably went through that one too fast. This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened?
Okay. There you go.
I'm bad
Okay,
at really.
thank
Yep.
Excuse me. Which one? First one? Uh-huh. She already told me that. writing that. Stupid. The next one. And like this. Why is that spelled the B? Yeah.
Well, we have several words in the English language that have letters in them that are silent. And it has to do with their original, a lot of the English words are borrowed from other languages. And so the spellings, we kept a lot of the spellings, but we have these silent, I mean, it's just, that's why. Like the word calm. Oh, well, no, calm does have an L sound to it. Never mind. That was not the right one to say. Or psalm has a P at the beginning of it. Or psychology has a P at the beginning of it.
Jaden, will you walk downstairs after this class?
Anybody need any other slides? Are we okay? Okay. All right, guys. So, like I said, we're not going to start reading today. We will do that on Monday. What I do need you to do to finish out class today,
Please don't do something hard.
it's not hard. It's vocabulary. Okay. I want you to do the synonym exercise for Unit 7. Synonyms. What are synonyms, guys? They mean the same. So do the synonym exercise. Synonyms.
I did.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording. So, Cohen, Kendall, we're starting now the